Pamela, thanks very much. Let's talk about all the breaking news on the president's travel ban. Republican Senator James Lankford is with us. He's a key member of the Senate Homeland Security and the Senate Intelligence Committees. Senator, thanks very much for joining us.
Glad to be with you.
I want to get to the breaking news. CNN is now learning that at least one of the federal judges who heard legal challenges to the president's executive order, that authorities have now had to step up security for that judge. Do you worry that could have been prompted by that decision, maybe prompted by other statements out there or tweets, if you will?
Yeah, we don't know what prompted it at this point and what's taken that on. I can tell you there are a lot of judges face a lot of security issues. And when we talk flippantly about judges in any way, or there's any conversation about judges, we miss the fact that they face a lot of threats. They deal with the criminal element. They deal with very difficult cases a lot, and very often they face real security risks.
Do you want President Trump to tone down his rhetoric when it comes to these federal judges?
Actually, it's just period for all of America. We're facing it both in the Senate, we're facing it around the nation. This is a good time to be able to help us get back to real discourse. We as Americans don't have to agree on everything. We can disagree, and we can disagree strongly. It doesn't have to be personal.
So you do want the president to tone down his rhetoric, because he's been very active on Twitter, as you know. He's been going after these judges.
Yeah, the president can choose to speak however he chooses to. Obviously, the people that voted for him through the process, they liked this kind of rhetoric. I would say, as the president of the United States, lead the nation in being able to help turn the volume down on a lot of the rhetoric. We're facing in the Senate floor and trying to get the volume down there of the debate and stop it being so personal. We're facing it around the country. When people suddenly shift to accusations and throwing names out and everything else, it doesn't help us actually have real dialogue about the real policy issues.
That's true, and I'll take that as a yes. Let's talk about this interview that the former Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, just gave to CNN's Jim Sciutto. And he said, and he was out only days ago, went less than 3 weeks ago, as the Director of National Intelligence. He said that he saw no intelligence necessitating this specific travel ban. You're on the Intelligence Committee. Did you see a specific threat over these past several weeks that could have resulted in a, quote, flood of terrorists coming into the United States if the president had not immediately installed that travel ban on those 7 Muslim-majority countries?
So it's not just 7 Muslim-majority countries, obviously, and you track this very well. These are countries that have, they're marked as state sponsors of terrorism, or there were countries of particular concern that the Obama administration, Congress had already voted on previously. So it's 7 very specific countries on this. The challenges for the former Director of National Intelligence and all of us, the Intelligence Committee, is not a matter of, is there a specific threat coming up? We're already at a high level of risk as a nation right now. We see that from the ISIS threats and everything else. What he's trying to identify, as I read his statement, is there a specific credible threat that's coming at us right now versus are we already at a high level of risk? We're
Senator, stand by for a moment.
This is CNN Breaking News.
The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals has now issued their ruling on the president's travel ban, dealing with these 7 Muslim-majority nations. We're getting that ruling into the Situation Room right now. We're going to share it with you shortly. Stand by for that. Senator Lankford, you've been closely following this case. All of us want to know what these 3 federal judges in San Francisco, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, have decided. But the stakes clearly for the U.S. and for so many people around the world are enormous right now.
They are enormous. And as we deal with both security risk and also realizing who we are as a nation, that we've always been a nation open to immigration. We've also always been a nation that's very attentive and aggressive on this. President Obama slowed down those refugees coming and did a short-term stop for the immigration from some of these areas as well, because we want to make sure that we got it right. I understand President Trump saying, I want to be able to check the Obama administration, how they did the vetting, and to be able to examine it and be able to see it as well. So it's understandable. It's reasonable for the president. Other presidents have done it. And now we'll have a court getting a chance to examine it.
Well, let's talk about the options out there. One option is that they prevent the president's travel ban from going forward, and it's basically status quo, what's going on right now. The other option is that they reverse that and they let the president's travel ban go into effect, and individuals from these 7 Muslim-majority countries will no longer be allowed to come into the United States, at least temporarily.
For 3 months.
Syrian refugees won't be allowed to come into the United States indefinitely. What do you hope the decision is?
You know what? I would hope that they would actually say to the president the same thing that the judges said to the previous president, that said this is the right of the president to be able to make a decision on national security issues. Clearly, the law already gives that latitude to the president. People may agree or disagree with the president's decision, but I think the law already gives that kind of latitude to him. I would hope that we don't get past this 3 months. They can get a chance to do the inspection. Quite frankly, I would hope that they would do it less than that and be able to evaluate it. It was a very messy rollout. As you know, there were 4 chaotic days as embassies
Why
had
were
one
they so unprepared? It was so messy, this rollout. Why did they just do it the way they did and cause such chaos at whether at JFK or Dulles Airport here or LAX in San Francisco or international airports? People who had valid visas to come to the United States could no longer come.
Yeah, it was chaotic for hours there. There were 4 solid days of chaos. What they didn't do and they made the mistake on, they have now admitted. General Kelly has already come out and said we made a mistake. We should have let the information out early to these embassies, to airports, to the airlines, to our customs officials, let everyone look at it, see the interpretation, and then put it into effect. Instead, they put it into effect, and you had 4 days where some airlines interpreted it some way, the airport interpreted in a different way, the embassies overseas interpreted a different way, consular officials interpreted different, and then customs officials interpreted it. 4 days, everybody's trying to figure out what decision. Are legal permanent residents involved, American citizens involved? They've cleared all that up, and it's a much smoother process at this point as they made it clear to everyone. For instance, legal permanent residents are not affected by this. They can get a chance to come in. Legal visa holders are not affected. They can get a chance to come in. So all of those things have now been cleared up, but now there's a pause to say, now what?
Because I know you agree that the president, you believe the president has the legal authority to do this right now, but you know, the president is not backing down. He says that he had to do it right away. He couldn't wait a week, couldn't wait a month, because terrorists would have flooded the country. You're on the Intelligence Committee. Do you believe that?
We have a high level of risk, but there's not a specific credible risk of something. There has always been a risk, and you can tell from what's happening in Europe right now, where those individuals from ISIS are traveling with refugees. They are trying to be able to move through the asylum process. That is documented. We've seen that in multiple terrorist attacks there. What the president has stepped up to say is the same thing President Obama said. Let's get a chance to take a look at this. Let's evaluate it, make sure that we're screening in the right way.
How credible, how high is the risk from those 7 countries that we're talking about that have these restrictions imposed? Because Europe doesn't have the restrictions imposed.
Right.
Most of the Muslim nations don't have restrictions. The largest Muslim country, Indonesia, that there are no restrictions there. Largest Arab country, Egypt. But these 7 countries, how high is that risk? You've been briefed on this.
Right. So here's the unique issue on those 7 countries. These 7 countries that are state sponsors of terrorism, like Iran, or there are countries where there's an active war that's going on, for instance, Yemen and Syria, or Iraq. We're also countries dealing with Somalia, where there's no functioning government there. We have no relationship with them to know if we're getting good documentation. So it's 7 very specific countries that Congress and President Obama agreed on before are countries of particular concern, or countries that are state sponsors of terrorism. There is something very unique. I know they're often being labeled as a Muslim ban. It's not a Muslim ban. It's countries where there's active state sponsor of terrorism or a particular concern due to the war that's happening there or no functioning government.
We are now getting the breaking news, the headline, Senator, out of this Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision. I want to be precise. The appeals court has ruled against reinstating the president's travel ban against the 7 Muslim majority countries. Want to be very precise. We're going through, our experts, our legal analysts are going through all of the document right now. They've just released it, this 3-member Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. They are saying that this decision will prevent the reinstatement of those travel restrictions, Senator, from those 7 Muslim majority countries. Your reaction?
So if I'm reading that correctly and interpreting correctly what you're saying, what they're saying is that they will start again those individuals being able to move freely from those countries.
Right, which is what's going on right now.
Correct, which is already happening right now. And the challenge that will be for the president or for anyone in dealing with immigration enforcement is, how does any executive be able to handle this in the days ahead, and what happens next?
Because this is a major setback for the president. You argued just a few moments ago that he had the legal authority to go ahead and impose these restrictions, but this Court of Appeals, this decision now by these 3 federal judges says, you know what, they're keeping the status quo in place. In other words, there are restrictions, the restrictions that the president wanted imposed are not going forward.
Right. So what they're choosing is they're saying we like the Obama restrictions, not the Trump restrictions. And so we'll just see where that goes from there. It'll be interesting to be able to read the opinion. There was a lot of debate back and forth on whether this is a Muslim ban or a religious ban. They moved back and said the candidate, Trump, made lots of statements about blocking Muslims. Is that what this is? Obviously, the U.S. attorneys and all those individuals said that's not what this is, because it doesn't affect 40 different Muslim nations, including, as you said, the largest Muslim nations. So we'll see what the actual reading is.
Let me go to Jeffrey Toobin, our senior legal analyst. Jeffrey, I assume you're going through this decision by the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. Your analysis.
It's a 29-page opinion, and it is a complete and total repudiation of the Trump administration's legal position in this case. It says that the state of Washington and the state of Minnesota have standing. They have the right to bring this case, and they have made a preliminary showing that the executive order is unconstitutional. So the stay put into effect by Judge Robart, the George W. Bush appointee in Seattle, is still in effect. The other point to make about today's ruling is that it is unanimous among the three judges, the Carter appointee, the Obama appointee, and the George W. Bush appointee. So there is no political division among the three judges. This case is not over. The legal proceedings will continue, and there are several possibilities of where we may go from here, including a request for an emergency stay of the stay in the United States Supreme Court. The Trump administration now could go to Justice Anthony Kennedy, who is the justice who supervises the Ninth Circuit, and ask him to stay the stay and reimpose the executive order. Justice Kennedy almost certainly will refer that request to the full court, the 8 current justices. But the Trump administration now has to make a decision. Do they go to the Supreme Court and try to get this decision reversed? Or do they go to the district court for more extensive proceedings and try to get the order reversed there? Either way, Trump administration has lost dramatically and completely, and they're going to have to decide what to do now.
And Jeffrey, just to be precise, if it were to go to the U.S. Supreme Court, right now there are only 8 justices on the U.S. Supreme Court, 4 appointed by Democratic presidents, 4 appointed by Republican presidents, and we don't know what the outcome of their decision would be. But if it's 4-4, this lower court, Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals decision would remain in effect. Is that right?
That's exactly right, Wolf. Tie rulings when the court has an even number of justices affirm the lower court ruling. They don't establish a national precedent the way a Supreme Court opinion with 5 justices establishes a national precedent. But if this ruling, today's ruling upholding the stay, is appealed to the Supreme Court and the court splits 4-4, the stay will maintain in effect. I don't want to overly complicate this story any more than it's already complicated, but remember there are other challenges to the Trump executive order in many other jurisdictions in the United States. So those cases are now going to start bubbling up through the system. It is clear, I think, that the Supreme Court is going to have to address this sooner rather than later. That doesn't mean this week, but given the magnitude of this ruling, given the number of cases, given the importance of this issue, the Supreme Court is going to get this case at some point in the next few months.
And very quickly, Jeffrey, the fact that it was a unanimous decision by these 3 federal judges, Judge Canby, Judge Friedland, Judge Clifton, how significant is that in considering where to go next? If it would have been, for example, 2-1, would that have made a difference as opposed to a unanimous decision?
Well, as a technical legal matter, there's no difference between a 2-1 decision and a 3-0 decision. However, as a political matter, as a matter of sort of the public perception of the 2 rulings, there's a big difference between 2-1 and 3-0, especially when the judges come from different political backgrounds. This decision will have a lot more public credibility because it is unanimous, and I think it complicates the Trump administration's attempt, if they choose to make it, to disparage this decision as simply a political act. The fact that it comes from a diverse political panel will insulate this decision from a kind of criticism that it would have gotten if it had been 2 Democrats versus 1 Republican.
A major setback for President Trump and his administration, a complete setback. I should point out the travel ban that he wanted to go into effect will not, at least for now, will not go into effect. And Senator Lankford, I know you've been looking at this as well. I want to get your reaction. This is a pretty complete loss for the White House.
So Jeffrey Toobin, I agree with him completely. When it's a 3-0 decision on it, that does make a difference in political. It doesn't make a difference in the actual standing of the ruling, but it does make a difference in that. The other option that he did not mention there is for the Trump administration to be able to pull the executive order back, take a look at exactly what the court identified as unconstitutional and inconsistent, strike that area, resubmit a new executive order, and to say, now we have corrected this executive order, this is how we're going to carry it out.
You think he should do that?
I think it's a possibility. Obviously, he has several options on the table, not only arguing with the Supreme Court, dealing with the stays he mentioned, but also trying to correct an executive order and get it back out.
Because if he goes to the Supreme Court, he might lose there as well if there's only 8 justices.
Correct, yeah. 4-4 court is obviously unpredictable, and the court has been very hesitant to be able to push out a lot of issues that are 4-4.
Senator Lankford, thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate it very much.